After the Miami Fusion folded at the end of the 2001 MLS season, there was no pro soccer team left in the Miami area, and it stayed that way for a bit under 5 years when a new team came about, Miami FC. Now hold on for a second. I know you might be thinking that you came here for the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. This is that team. It would later rebrand to that historic name several years later. This team, Miami FC, is not the same as the Miami FC currently playing in the USL Championship. So just roll with me for a bit. The team would join the USL First Division in their second season to play in the 2006 USL season. Let's remind ourselves that this USL First Division is not the same as the current United Soccer leagues we know today. I just want to briefly explain how the USL First Division came to be. Let's go back to 1989. In 1989, there was the Western Soccer League in the US, which predominantly served Western American soccer markets. Then there was the American Soccer League, which predominantly served Eastern American soccer markets. Now in 1990, those two leagues would merge to form the American Professional Soccer League, or the APSL. Now what that meant is that they would play one game against each other in the final of the APSL to determine the championship, and that was the only game that these two former leagues would have their teams play against each other. So it was really still felt like there were two separate leagues, but they would play one game against each other to determine the APSL championship. Now over the years, they would then later rebrand in 1995 to become the A-League, which is actually the same name as the soccer league in Australia. And this was actually after 1994, where they tried to become the permanent First Division Soccer League in the US, but they ended up losing out to Major League Soccer, which would play their first season in 1996. Now over the next 10 years, from 1995 to 2005, the league would go through a series of rebrands, and then they would eventually rebrand to become the USL First Division. So that's how the league came about. A sports marketing company by the name of Traffic Sports USA, a subsidiary of Traffic Sports from Brazil, would become the owners of the team. This might seem like a minor point, but Traffic Sports will become an integral part of the story later on, so remember that name and stay tuned. Like, this is going to be about half of the video just on Traffic Sports, because we would later find out that this is a sketchy company. Miami FC signed Brazilian legend Romario, who played for them and performed really well, scoring 19 goals, but he only played in the 2006 season, their first season, and he would eventually continue his playing career with other teams. When Romario signed to Miami FC at the age of 40 years old, yet he signed at a pretty old age to Miami FC. He was regarded as the biggest signing for USL at the time by many people. I suppose you could call this kind of their Beckham signing. I mean, David Beckham, I believe, signed in 2007 for the LA Galaxy. He signed in 2006. So it was a year before, and this was kind of their big signing, though he wouldn't have the same type of influence overall on USL as David Beckham did on MLS. Funny enough, he is actually currently a politician in Brazil, so maybe he'll follow the footsteps of George Weah, who was a former Ballon d'Or winner, I believe the only African to win the Ballon d'Or. He was a Liberian striker, but he's currently, I believe, the president of Liberia at the moment. So maybe we'll be seeing Romario 2026. Another notable player was a 1994 World Cup Brazilian player named Zinho, who also played for the club for 2 seasons before later becoming manager of the team. So Miami FC would begin playing at Tropical Park Stadium. They would later move in 2009 to Lockhart Stadium, the former home of the Fusion. With this move to Lockhart Stadium, they had officially moved out of Miami to move to Fort Lauderdale, which was kind of a northern outskirt of Miami. To anyone familiar with Miami soccer history, this has happened a lot to teams that lack support playing in the main city. A lot of times if teams were playing in a main city and they weren't getting much support, they would just move them to Fort Lauderdale, where oftentimes they seem to get a lot more fan support from the locals. Over 4 years in the USL First Division and 1 year in the USSF Division 2, I might make a video on that later on, because that's a very confusing thing where they took the NASL and the USL, and they put them together for a league because the NASL was newly formed, and this was like the second league called the NASL. There was one that was much more famous in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but this league had no relation to it. It was just formed, and it wanted to be the new second division league in US soccer, taking over from USL, but in the first year it seemed like US soccer was kind of indecisive, so they just put all the teams in the NASL and the USL together for a year to kind of give them one kind of buffer year to see who they would want to put as a second division league, and they ended up just giving them both second division status. Unfortunately, in these 5 years, of course, how I said 4 years in USL First Division and 1 year in USSF Division 2, Miami FC didn't make the playoffs once. Their attendance actually only peaked at 2,000 fans per game in their first season, but come the end of their 2010 season, they were well below 1,300 fans per game. Things were not looking the greatest for the fans, so a new strategy was going to be used. In 2011, two major things happened for the team. The NASL were going to play their first season after that USSF Division 2 fiasco, and the Fort Lauderdale Strikers would be a founding member of this new league. Yup, that just happened. Feels like this team was trying really hard to replicate the past, as they would be playing in a league named after the popular North American Soccer League, now the second iteration, and would rebrand themselves to be the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, the fourth iteration of that team's name. Even Tim Robbie, the son of Joe and Elizabeth Robbie, who owned the first and second iterations of the Strikers, was announced as team president. They were really trying to demonstrate their so-called history. Things started to improve after the rebrand. The Strikers made it to the playoffs in the NASL in 2011. It was quite easy to make it to the playoffs, being that the top 6 teams in the 8-team league would qualify. They would actually make it to the finals in the 2011 Soccer Bowl. Unfortunately for them, they lost to the NSC Minnesota Stars, which would later become known as the Minnesota United, who currently play in Major League Soccer at the moment. Even their attendance started to increase, going from about 1,200 fans in their final season in 2010 to 4,000 fans per game as the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. Keep in mind, they were still playing in the same stadium. Clearly, branding and success on the field comes a long way in bringing fans to the games, because they had about the same team as well. They had a pretty similar roster when they first rebranded to the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. It's not like they completely redid their whole team. The team would continue to perform well, making it to the playoffs in 4 of their 6 years of existence in the North American Soccer League. They even made it to the finals again, playing against the San Antonio Scorpions at Toyota Field, unfortunately losing 2-1. At the rate they were going to become the New England Revolution of the NASL. They were making it to a ton of finals, but they would never win. After the final, things started to get really weird. One of the major guys in the Traffic Sports USA ownership group, Aaron Davidson, decided to cut the team's payroll by $200,000 right after the team's loss in the final. The NASL players did not make MLS level money, struggling to get by already, so this really hurt them financially. It also left the players very confused. They were wondering why, after they had so much on-field success, why the heck were they cutting their wages? Now, the reason why Aaron Davidson cut the roster payroll was to actually fund sketchy business dealings that Traffic Sports USA was doing. Now, I'm going to try and explain this in a nutshell, but it's quite hard to. So the way that Traffic Sports USA would make money, and Traffic Sports as a whole would make money, is they would get marketing deals. Now, the way that they got those marketing deals is when things started getting illegal, because a lot of the time they would bribe top officials in CONCACAF to get those marketing deals. And at first this worked out quite well, because they would end up getting marketing deals for CONCACAF Champions League, the Gold Cup, the CONCACAF World Cup qualifying, and many other deals as well. Those were the most notable deals, but there was other deals as well, I believe. These were not small deals as well. A lot of the time they were multi-million-dollar deals, and it was working out for them quite well. Keep in mind that this relates to the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, as Traffic Sports USA, who was engaging in these sketchy deals, they owned Fort Lauderdale Strikers. It also turns out that the NASL had significant influence by Traffic Sports USA. Now, I want to make sure that I make this clear. This was common knowledge right from the beginning. They said straight out that Traffic Sports USA owned many of the teams in the league, and they started up the league. But at the time when Traffic Sports first started up the league, they didn't have a real bad reputation, which they would eventually get later. The reason why this league was created, I'm not quite sure exactly why it was created, but it seems like Aaron Davidson, who is running a lot of the operation, he saw that Miami FC was kind of failing, and then it looked like the ownership, it looked like the people out in Brazil where Traffic Sports as a whole was operated, it looked like they were trying to pull the plug on Traffic Sports USA because it looked like they were not being successful. So he wanted to get more funds to create this new league that he convinced them would like topple MLS, and they agreed to continue funding the operation. And I think they thought that maybe it will help them get a bigger foothold in the US. So that's kind of my theory on it, but I'm not quite sure about that. The reason why they started the league at this specific time was in 2009, the USL was facing a lot of stability. There's a lot of angry owners, angry at how the league was operated, and the league was getting sold by Nike to new owners, so then many of the people in Traffic Sports USA would then try to convince many of the owners in the USL First Division to come over to this new league that was going to be even better than the USL First Division and would actually listen to them. So many of them actually did move to the NASL, where they would actually form. So with the USL First Division facing all this instability, the NASL would officially launch their first season in 2011, and they were looking to topple the USL First Division at first, but their ultimate goal, or at least Aaron Davidson's ultimate goal, was to topple Major League Soccer because he didn't really like the way Major League Soccer was run. We have to note too is that since Traffic Sports owned so much of the league and the league's identity was tied quite a bit with Traffic Sports, if Traffic would go down, this league could potentially go down as well. Now things started to fall apart for Traffic Sports USA when Chuck Blazer, a former top official in CONCACAF, was caught for many corruption charges by the FBI, I believe. The FBI wanted to wire him up to catch other soccer officials in the States, so they did wire him up, and he recorded many conversations with top soccer officials, particularly in CONCACAF, and then the FBI would catch many of these top officials in CONCACAF, and they would interview them, and then they would expose more people who were corrupt in CONCACAF. And as you can see, this is creating a domino effect of more people getting caught for corruption, and then more people getting caught for corruption, and then eventually this led to many of the people getting caught in Traffic Sports USA, including people like Enrique Sanz de Santa Maria, who was Aaron Davidson's right-hand man, who would later spill the beans on a lot of stuff about Traffic Sports USA, which would end up getting Aaron Davidson caught in the end as well. They would also end up catching Jose Huila, who owned all of Traffic Sports USA as well. So at this point in 2015, they ended up indicting all three of those people on many charges. I'm not going to go into the specifics of who ended up going to jail and all that kind of stuff because you can research that on your own. It's going to take too long. All of these arrests were just after FIFA execs in Switzerland were arrested, and then the CONCACAF headquarters in Miami were stormed by the FBI, and yeah, that was when all the arrests started happening, and that was in 2015. And this is the point where you notice that actually these Fort Lauderdale Strikers owners of Traffic Sports USA were involved in that whole corruption scandal, the whole worldwide corruption scandal with soccer, where there's the FIFA corruption scandal and then there was the CONCACAF one, and this was predominantly the CONCACAF one. So this is where you find out about just a little small league named Fort Lauderdale Strikers. It ended up being a much more interesting club than you might think, but all for the wrong reasons. I just want to make this clear that the corruption at Traffic Sports USA doesn't mean that all the people in Fort Lauderdale working for Fort Lauderdale Strikers were like these horrible people who were fundamentally corrupt. Most of them, I'm sure most of these employees were not corrupt. I'm sure probably even the team president, Tim Robbie, wasn't even corrupt. It was just these really corrupt owners at the top working for Traffic Sports who really were the villains in the situation. It's not the hardworking players on the team who are making barely enough to get by, just playing the game that they love, the game that they should be compensated a fair wage for, and they shouldn't be getting cut after a final where they just narrowly lost out. You know, it's not, we shouldn't be blaming the employees who are keeping the stadium running and stuff like that. Like, I just want to make this clear that it's not the employees whose fault this is. It's the people at the top who are fundamentally corrupt, who are bribing top officials at CONCACAF and giving the whole reputation of the team a bad name. Anyway, in fall of 2014, Traffic Sports USA sold the Strikers to a Brazilian consortium. One of the owners announced with this ownership later on in early 2015 was Ronaldo Nazario himself, the 39-year-old who's one of the most exciting players, in my opinion, ever to grace the game. You know, I didn't watch him back when he was playing, but you know, I've watched some clips, and it makes me just wish the Brazilian national team played like they used to, because he was pretty exciting to watch in these clips. Believe it or not, there was even some speculation about Ronaldo himself playing for the team in the 2015 season if he got in good enough shape. To my great disappointment, that never happened. Apparently, he didn't even appear much at events with the Strikers. The new owners fired the popular manager at the time and brought in a lot of Brazilians to the team. They'd later hire the manager back and then fire him shortly later. That'd be a little bit of a weird thing to put on the resume, to say the least. Midway through the season, the team moved from Lockhart Stadium and Central Broward Stadium. With this, the Fort Lauderdale Strikers were officially not in Fort Lauderdale anymore, now playing their games out of Lauderhill, Florida, or Lauderdale. I'm not sure if I said that name properly, but apparently this is only about a 15-minute drive away from Lockhart Stadium, so it's not too bad. Attendances at this point in 2016 had dropped to about 1,300 fans per game, and the team was struggling financially. Paychecks were starting to arrive late, so the owner of the Strikers' rivals, Tampa Bay Rowdies owner Bill Edwards, loaned about $450,000 to the team to keep them afloat for at least the rest of the season. The announcement of the end of the Strikers had to have come in the least dramatic way possible. Speculation was mounting in early 2017 over if the team will even exist or not. And when the 2017 NASL schedule was announced, the Strikers were not included. It was official. The Fort Lauderdale Strikers were done. For the fourth time. The fourth iteration in the old NASL, the second one in the APSL, the third one was a minor league club briefly branded the Fort Lauderdale Strikers and the USISL. And then the end of the fourth iteration came full circle when the Fort Lauderdale Strikers 4.0 folded in the second NASL. Apparently the ownership group for the Fort Lauderdale Strikers had not paid back Bill Edwards, which allowed Edwards to force the Strikers to liquidate assets in May 2017. He would actually buy the team's naming rights, trademarks, customer and vendor lists, and any remaining contracts for a grand total of $5,100. The man's paying the big buck. Although the purchase seems a little meaningless, it actually isn't, because the fact that he bought those naming rights means that potentially there'll never be a team named the Fort Lauderdale Strikers again, because they would have to buy the naming rights, I believe, off of him. I mean, I don't think he has an interest in opening a team in Fort Lauderdale when he has a team in USL at the moment named the Tampa Bay Rowdies, but hey, you never know. I just don't think that's going to happen again, especially being that Inter Miami had a chance to name their USL team the Fort Lauderdale Strikers to become the 5.0 version of the team, but that hope was squashed when the team's name was announced to be Fort Lauderdale SC. Not quite as creative, but I mean, I should at least be grateful it wasn't named Inter Miami too, like so many affiliate teams of MLS teams. Traffic Sports USA would sell the league in November 2016, and ever since then, the league tried to distance themselves from that company. I don't believe the league has officially folded, but they canceled their 2018 season, then their 2019 season, and then their 2020 season. So yeah, I think this league is done and dusted. So just to conclude this was a little Floridan team that was overshadowed, unfortunately, by a corruption scandal that went worldwide and that their owners were involved in. That's the unfortunate reality of this team. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Please check out other videos in this Miami area soccer history series. I'll put a link to that playlist in the description down below. And until next time, see ya.